Hello and welcome to this 18th edition of the International Conference on the Quality of Education. This year's theme is dedicated to highlighting key determinants for improving learning outcomes based on data analysis from teams PEARLS and PISA. I am delighted to moderate this fourth session in the presence of our guests, Marco Turk from Russia, Ari POKKA from Finland, Gülsün KURUBACAK from Turkey, and Frederic FOVET from Canada. We had Marco Turk from Russia in the program, but unfortunately he had a health problem. We wish him a quick recovery. I will read his presentation. The title of the presentation of Professor Marco Turk is Contemporary Educational Reality in and Future Needs. Presentation outline: number 1, introduction, and 2, contemporary educational reality. 3, what is instructional design. 4, who are instructional designers. And 5, why do we need instructional designers in contemporary education? Contemporary education and contemporary reality is characterized by some characteristics. The world is changing faster than ever in cities, transport, energy, water, and the technology-driven world. We have some other characteristics of contemporary reality, especially in education. Diversified pupils and students' learning needs, altered attention span, and changed teaching and learning environments. And also education and labor market reality characterized by some new skills needed to enter the market, the employment market. Schools will need to serve new type of learners. We have some category of generation from the beginning of the century. We have the builders, and after that we have baby boomers and generation X and generation Y and generation Z, and actually and currently generation Alpha. Each generation is characterized by some characteristics in social markers: iconic cars, iconic toys, music devices, leadership styles, and screen content. And the current generation Alpha have some contemporary needs. But when I see the results of PISA 28, we can see that more than 50% countries are below the OECD average. What are the causes of these effects? Does teaching profession is skilled and prepared to teach new alphas? How do we prepare to meet the challenges and opportunities the future will bring? At the level of educational system, we have some new needs, and this educational system needs new educational experts and professionals. These experts can be designed by the name instructional designers. What is ID or instructional designers? There are professionals in education that have competencies and skills in science and arts. What is instructional designers? Solving instructional problems by systematically analyzing the condition of learning and designing satisfying learning experience. The systematic process of translating principles of learning and instruction into plans or specifications for instructional materials or activities. But what are the purposes of instructional designer? Number one, improve learning and instruction by following systematic approach. Number two, improve management of instructional design and development procedures by monitoring and controlling the functions of the systematic approach. Number three, improve evaluation processes, including learner performance. Number four, test or build learning or instructional theory by means of theory-based design within systematic instructional model. Now, who are instructional designers? First, facilitators of successful learning experiences. For that, instructional designer profile must be focused on student success and use a wide range of methods to achieve that goal, involved in teaching and learning research. Highly and diversely qualified, far from one-size-fits-all. Educational sciences, pedagogy, educational psychology, IT, higher education studies, and distance learning. And other profile is experienced in education, teaching, technology development, and graphic design. So, instructional designer have to do some responsibilities, and these responsibilities can be categorized in four categories. The first category is design instructional materials and courses, particularly for digital delivery. Two, manage the efforts of professors, teachers, and administration, IT, other instructional designers, and others to achieve better student learning. Three, train professors, teachers to leverage technology and implement pedagogy effectively. And four, support professors, teachers when they run into technical or instructional challenges. And the Professor Turk has led a survey about instructional designers and what do they actually do in terms of design or develop exciting courses. One of these instructional designer said, I design and develop course materials ideas to support the professor. Whatever they ask, I find a way to accomplish, usually with free software. Other instructional content, I write and design curriculum, both digital and paper, for instructors and facilitators and provide them professional development. And in terms of quality assurance tester, I make sure course resources meet accessibility and quality assurance standards. In management, the instructional designers manage projects and do campaign for instructional design and liaison and coordination between professors, between teachers, and other stakeholders in the school. In terms of training, we have technology trainer, instructional designer train faculty members on all tools used and the best practices for teaching with those tools. In the In the domain of pedagogy trainer, I teach faculty how to teach in the online environment. And in terms of support, I manage the fast-paced, high-volume course management system help desk with phone and email constituent requests. And timely support, I offer one-on-one consults for faculty looking to resolve anything from technical problems to instructional challenges that can be met using educational technologies. And the survey shows that the very important tasks done by instructional designer are learning new technology, project management, learning science theory, instructional design models, strategic planning, and teaching experience. The task not important or somewhat important are research, multimedia production, data analysis, graphic design, coding, and writing for publication. Why do we need instructional designer in contemporary online education? Teaching is something mandatory that is almost our everyday job. However, we are not educated on how to teach, especially in an online environment. We teach how we want, no one supports us, and nobody really cares about that. Isn't that a paradox? Yes, it is a paradox, and to support teachers to improve their practices, pedagogical practices, they have to be supported by persons who have who has trained in this responsibility. And Professor Turk recommend that the educational system has to establish instructional designer who has responsibility to support teachers in their tasks in the school. Thank you so much. Thank you for Mark Turk for this presentation. And I am happy to welcome Professor Frederic FOVET from Canada, and Professor Ari POKKA from Finland. The second presentation will be done by Professor Ari POKKA from Finland, who is meditation.
Thank you very much, Abed Nasser, and it's a delight to be here with you Friday evening. So when I was asked that what do I like to do something in this conference, especially speak about the assessment, I said to Abed Nasser that if I have the possibilities to take a little bit different point of view, I can maybe do something. So, and he accepted that, and now I like to show something about my ideas about the education, assessment, and the school. I have been 25 years as a high school principal, president of the Finnish Principals Association and the International Confederation of Principals, the worldwide organization. And during the last years, I have worked out of the Finland developing education systems in Romania, Ukraine, China, and the Arabian Peninsula. So I think that these schools and these works has been somehow built up the idea of the school, and then also the idea of the assessment tools, and maybe what is important in evaluation. So now I'm looking for my presentations. Just a second. Hopefully I will find them. Or do I have the possibilities to share the screen?
Okay.
Do I need the permission for that?
It's okay.
Yeah, it's okay. Now I can see it. Thank you very much. So I like to speak a little bit about the things what are maybe not so easy to find when we're using different kind of national or international assessment and evaluation. And most of the ideas what I now try to present you belongs or are part of my book called Top Class, the Finnish School Leadership and Management, which I wrote some years ago. And I have always think about it that there's a lot of that kind of values inside a school, which are not maybe so easy to evaluate or assess. And maybe they are also perhaps the most important part of the education and the things what happens for the children in our schools. So shall we go on, or because I think okay. Like I said, I have developed the schools and the national and international curriculums during the 25 years into several countries, especially, of course, in Finland, but also out of the Finland. And all of the time when I start this kind of process with the new people, or they could be education policymakers, or they could be the people who work in the school, I never ask the question that how could you like to be? But I always ask that what are your values? Because I think, and basically this is a very important part of the Finnish education, the value-based is that the values are one of the most important thing what conduct our work in the school. And despite that we giving the students new kind of knowledge and competencies, I'm quite sure that one of the most important thing is that what kind of values the school carry on and what kind of values the whole education system carry on. So that's why I think this is the opening question and maybe the most important question what the educator can do to another educator, to somehow find out that what are those basic values, well, where you start to build something new, or you start to reform your school system. And then we take the next one. Sometimes I think, and especially during this big assessment like PISA and many other things, I have get the feeling that the education is somehow, some level, that kind of business where the adult, well-educated people change their ideas about the education systems, and it's more like that kind of intellectual game. But I think that the most important thing, what all of the educators must think about it, that how good and meaningful childhood we can offer our students and children. And maybe every now and then it's very important just keep this simple idea on my mind when we start building something new or we start to make the reforms. Make that question that is this something valuable for our kids, or is it just valuable for ourselves as an adult or researcher or education policy maker. And there is the recent data from the Finnish research, where what we do every second year, where we somehow try to check out that what is the welfare situation in our schools. And as you see, more than 50% of the Finnish girls between 16 to 19 years who studied in the senior high school, they don't feel well because of the high academic pressure in the senior high school and the university entrance. So actually we can see that the school systems in every part of the world somehow can push the children in the situation where schools don't give them that kind of feeling that I'm okay, I'm good enough, I get good results, I'm motivated, but giving a lot of stress and things which are not very healthy. And I think that one of the key reasons for that sometimes is that we do a lot of assessment inside of school. School still somehow live the time of the numbers and the rankings inside there. Self-evaluation has been becoming the part of the Finnish education very strongly. Now in every part of the curriculum we speak about the self-evaluation. But here the self-evaluation is actually meaning that what is actually the value of the school, or what is the valuable questions what we must do our kids. Is it the question that how good you are in the science, or what your level is in the history, or maybe in the maths, whatever subject it is? Or is the value more that what kind of person you will be out when you ended your school career? What kind of competencies, what kind of skills, what kind of values you carry on? So I think that these two, they are not the, let's say this way, they are not the different things, but somehow I think that we must concentrate more to see about what's happening our kids as a human being, not so much how well they are prepared, how well knowledge they have on their mind when they ended the school. So self-evaluation is the part of that the students start to understand they much better as a lifelong learners, not just the persons who make the some numbers test after test. And then we can continue. This is my favorite subject, actually, because the evaluation is really important. My topic, even I say that there's a lot of value inside a school what we can't evaluate, we can still say that the evaluation is very important. And evaluation actually so important that if we like to make some curriculum reform, if we like to make the big reform in the field of education, we must think very carefully that what is the way how we evaluate our work in the school, because that's the way where we can win or lose the game. If we make let's say we reform the school and the teaching and the learning very modern, but our methods of evaluation are old-fashioned, I'm quite sure that somehow even the ideas of the reform are very well, then the evaluation somehow turned those things upside down. But this evaluation battle is something what we do together with our students and teachers inside the school. But many politics, especially after the PISA, this battle of evaluation has been the battle between the nations. So, and I think that that is not the way how what was maybe the main idea of the PISA or whatever evaluation that the politics are worried about, that what is our situation in the world ranking. But more, I think that I hope and in the future that we are doing that kind of joint reform where we are looking together that, okay, what are the directions where the education must be developed, that all the kids in the world have the better possibilities to be good learners. Okay, let's continue. And then I think it's very important question that whether we measure in the school, is it some kind of data of the past? Because I think that our kids are telling totally different stories, and they are the kids who are writing the history of the future. And I think that in their future history, they are speaking about some kind of those things like unlimited data sources or new competencies. They are speaking about the participative media and the artificial intelligence. They are speaking about the globalization and not career-oriented working life, environmental distress and sustainability, the personal values, and of course, their life during the pandemic. Those could be the part of their history, the story of their life. And then I think that somehow the school, teaching, learning, and evaluation must somehow follow about their stories. We are not measure our stories, or if we measure our stories, we are measuring the wrong thing, I think so. And then please, next one. So, what had happening after 20 years of the PISA test? What we have learned? We have learned that we have the huge differences between countries, genders, even the areas inside a nation. And what have been our answers? One answer always, what you heard when the education policymakers or even people who work in the schools are discussing about, is that they're speaking about the history and the culture, and those are the excuses why the things are so difficult to change. We can compare each other, but it's really difficult to change because we have always the explanation why the changes are so difficult to make. Or then we have the countries, also in the Europe, who actually changed their education policy. And the reason for that was that they like to make the better results in the international tests. And then you can ask that, is there any sense actually to follow testing culture and make the reforms that you maybe are ranked number 10, not number 15? Is it something valuable for our kids, really? And then I think that the one thing, especially if you look at the European level, I think it's very interesting to see that how huge variation is there in between the countries in the European Union, for example. We have the Finland, we have the Estonia, we have the Netherlands, who are quite well in the PISA ranking. And then we have the countries, former Eastern Europe, or maybe some other parts of the world, which makes totally different, who have totally different position. And after all, after these 20 years, we are actually so well benchmark all the education systems that we can truly think about it, that if somebody like to make the changes, all the information is somehow available. But because of history, culture, or whatever, all of these changes are quite difficult to make. So the only thing what's happening there, I think, many times, or nowadays even more, is that every second year we have the different kind of ranking list, and somebody feel themselves bitter and somebody feel happy because they are going up or going down. Actually, in Finland, we have been very interested about PISA, or let's say that we were not very interested and we were good in PISA. But now when we are getting a little bit lower points, we have find a lot of different kind of reasons for that. And as a people who work every day in the school as a principal, I don't actually have seen such changes what our policymakers like to see behind these results. Especially, I hate the ideas that this is a reason because our kids are lazy or they are not interested about the school. I think that in these times, school must go and take a look of the mirror that what is there. Is there some problem if our kids are not so interested? Okay, then perhaps my last one. So, all of this words about the assessment and maybe some critical point of view, I think that the maybe and perhaps the true value of the school is in those things that cannot be measured, but prove they existent as a good life of our kids, our students, our next generation. So when we evaluate the school in the future, I hope that we find ways to evaluate the school as a whole system, not just somehow divided different kind of subject or contents or competencies. But we also try to see, let's say, the life a little bit further, because we are not raising these kids because of the education or because of the school, but we are raising them because of their good life, continuous learning, and hopefully some of them are able to make our society, our world a little bit better place to be. So maybe that's also the main value of the school. So, and then I think there's one still left, very easy one. So I'd like to thank you. And like I said, these ideas of the education, not only the evaluation, based very much about my book, Top Class Finnish School, Leadership and Management. It has been now translated several languages, and the next one will be published in Romania quite soon. Thank you very much. It has been nice to be with you, and I have still a little bit time to answer questions, or maybe somebody like to make some comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. POKKA, for this excellent presentation. Can you hear me?
Yes, sure. Good. Very well.
And now because you have to leave in few minutes, I will ask you one or two questions.
Yes, sure.
The first questions, more important is what kind of person to be after school years, but do this goal can achieve it without effort from children and pressure from school.
Would you ask it once again? I didn't catch maybe the main idea. Just shortly repeat. Thank you. Abdel Nasser?
Hey, I might jump in. I'm Frederic. I maybe have a question for you. We can fill the gap. Obviously, my presentation is going to go along with the lines of what you've indicated too, the need to be assessing other factors and not just standardized outcomes. But obviously, in this climate, there's also always the thirst for indicators. So how can we create indicators for schools to be able to see that they're actually achieving what they are wanting to achieve in terms of well-being, inclusion, a feeling of affiliation, etc.?
Yeah, I think that that's very important because, like I said, that okay, these things are not something what we can measure, but truly we can see that some of these things what we can see quite valuable things inside the schools. They are something where we can have some indicators, or let's say well-being is quite good example in Finland. We have now running, our Ministry of the Health have now running almost 20 years this kind of students' well-being questionnaire, and they repeat most of the questions every time, and it's we made it that for students in the lower secondary and high school level, and there we find, for example, this kind of well-being indicators, which are some of them are related about the students, let's say, physical well-being, but many also they personal well-being, they mental well-being, they habits, their family life. So actually, it has building that kind of system where we can follow our schools, our students, and then we can compare it that the whole data of the Finnish schools. And I strongly believe that some of the same kind of measurements can be organized, and questionnaires can be organized where we can go maybe more deep about this kind of things inside of school, which are not so visible. And I think this well-being as a big overall thing inside the school is quite good for that kind of evaluation, to school evaluation. But I hope that we find more ways that how we can actually somehow develop the system where students self-evaluation, how they evaluate by themselves about the school, how the school organizes daily life or whatever. And maybe this self-evaluation could be more structured, and then we get the user's information more available and more visible inside the school, because I think this user's knowledge of the school is always different than ours who are making the school.
Thanks for that. Yeah, I agree with you that the student voice is critically absent from the data that we gather at present.
Yeah, and and then now when we are now building the quality assurance system in the Finnish high school, this is something new because we don't have had that kind of standard quality, not the quality test, but quality assurance system. And one of the main thing what we have think about it there, that how we get more insight about the learning itself and teaching itself in the classroom. So one of my slides, I said something about we must maybe take a more better look of the process itself inside the school. And I think that the one questions about this quality assurance system in the high school is that how we can get more deep inside the process itself, and how we get the data out of there, where we can see that which are the directions where we must develop not only one high school but the whole system of the high school education in Finland.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So, are we happy now? And I think that the both of the next speakers are on the line. And I'm not, like I said for Abdel Nasser, I'm not dressed because of you like this, but because that my old school have 50 years anniversary party starting quite soon. So as an old principal of that school, I must go there and celebrate with my former teachers and former students.
Thank you so much, Ari.
Thank you, and have a nice weekend. And
if you want, I can ask you another question.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Okay.
You said that after 20 years of PISA, we didn't do so much to change our schools. What do you think must be done at the level of processes to improve learning outcomes?
Yeah, I think that, like I said, we have a lot of data and information. We have benchmarked all the developed education systems in the world. So actually, like the people who work in the field of education, I think that never in the lifetime we have known each other so well. Actually, all the things what happening in different part of the world, and we have seen also that how we can improve the education system if we like to make the good testing results. We have all the things what we need. Or if we like to develop the well-being school, we have all the information what we need. But still, I think the European Union is very good example that how huge differences we have in our continent. And okay, there's a political reason, there's many reasons how we can explain the things. But sometimes I felt myself, because I have been working many of the many of the countries who are starting now to develop the education policies, that the question is actually not the education. The question is actually that how the society helps the schools be good. If I think the Finland and the Finnish story of education, the reason for the Finnish, how we improve the education in Finland was not that we just built the good schools and we educated our teachers in the university, but the reason for good education was that we also developed in same time social welfare system, healthcare system, possibilities to working life for both of the parents, actually to change the whole country, not only the education. Now, I think that the problem maybe of PISA and some other assessment is that we focused ourselves only the education, and somehow we don't notice that if we like the good education, we also must have a very stable society to helping the school be successful. Okay, any others, or are we happy for this?
Thank you so much, Ari, for your participation in this session and in our conference.
Thank you.
I hope we can see you later.
Sure.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
See you.
Our third presenter will be Dr. Gülsün KURUBACAK, who is a professor in distance education at the College of Open Education of Anadolu University. Welcome, Professor, and many thanks for accepting our invitation. Your presentation's title is Power of Digital Transformation, Smart Open and Distance Learning in the Transhumanist Era.
Hello, Dr. Naji. How are you? I am very happy to meet you. Thank you for inviting me to this conference. Today, I would like to share my thoughts about distance education, that's my expertise area. And also, I would like to talk about how can we improve outcomes of learning of all lifelong learners in the system, in the digital area. As you know, there is a dramatic change is happening right now in the society. The technology dramatically change our lives, but education and learning kind of slow to adapt this system. If you look at the outcomes of the different assessments, relations, we are not getting very well. So today I would like to talk about how can we use smart learning environments, smart distance open and distance learning environments to improve ourselves. So can I share my screen? Okay. If I can. Okay, I cannot success. Okay. I am trying to get my PowerPoint, but anyway, I can talk like that. I am Dr. Gülsün KURUBACAK, and thank you, Naji. You are the one of the first person, foreign person, tell my last name perfectly. It is the hardest one. I am from Anadolu University, College of Open Education at the Distance Education Department. I have been in this area nearly 35 years. So, distance education is improving our lives. But before pandemic, before COVID-19, we do not believe, nearly not believe distance education somehow we can use. And we have like flipped learning, like blended learning, like hybrid learning systems in our face-to-face classrooms. But we distance educators all the time tell the others, please switch your system, at least use the hybrid blended one in your system to improve students' access, improve students' critical thinking skills, improve students' problem-solving skills, to adapt to new lifestyle. Today, with pandemic, actually, we start to learn how to use these environments perfectly. Also, this is digital transformation. It is not meaning just use the technology by education. Technology itself not is technique. It is a culture. It is a kind of awareness. If you don't know about, I thank you. Yes, this is my communication addresses. Anytime you are welcome if you would like to connect with me. And also you are welcome to visit us at Anadolu University. Yes, digital transformation is very important. And we are also in the transhumanist area. What is transhumanism? Maybe you know and heard about it, but not think deeply. Today, humans are becoming robot. Basically, robots are becoming human. And technology is helping our lives to improve perfectly. Or we are becoming the slaves of technology. We don't know. It is depends on how you integrate technology, how you have information, awareness, culture about technology, how you produce technology, or just are you consuming the technology? You have to decide it. Okay, at the 21st century learning ideas, as I told before, face-to-face education has different ideas like hybrid, blended, flipped, whatever you name it. But at the same time, we start to talk about well-being, and all the people in the learning system, which the learning system is becoming lifelong learning, must feel socially, psychologically, physically perfect. The school system must provide that. And also strategic plannings, ethics, laws, ecological design. You can see all of them, gaming, gamification, several concepts are the main concerns of all kind of education right now. We have to open, behave the dynamic, global. It means global and local. How can you design? Okay, we can go to the next one. But at the COVID-19 area, something is also we have to realize, besides this basic learning 21st basics learning in the 21st century, like what is learning behavior? Can you define learning behavior for all level of your students or lifelong learners? Can you define informal, non-formal, and formal learning environments? New formal, what is new formal? What is new informal? What is new non-formal? Everything is changing. And also, how can you define social, environmental, psychological interactions in presence? How do lifelong learners feel about the system? Can we get that kind of information perfectly, or we are just focusing on the results, outcomes? What is flexible learning? How can you design flexible environments for your lifelong learners? They have different needs, they have different ideas, they have different expectations, they have different situations. Do you know about that? And or are you care about that? We have to. And this is next generation learning. We have to accept, and this is the age we have to transfer, first of all, ourselves as a designers. Okay. There is a saying from Holland, and I like it because most of the time we think about if we get the most expensive technology, it is enough. Sometimes I hear about it, okay, I can design PowerPoint or I can use Zoom or in the classroom or face-to-face classrooms. I can do everything. No, technology is just mean, but you have to understand human is always in the middle of learning. You have to design everything about human-centered ideas. If you look at the American system at the back 1957, they thought they were the leader in science. But when Russia sent the Sputnik in the space, and they realized they were not, and suddenly without plan, they integrate all new technologies into their classroom and start to measure the outcomes of learning, and they understood the learning outcome were getting worse. So it doesn't mean you have nice technology, new technology. It doesn't mean your lifelong learners are learning. Okay, if you look at the versions and open and distance learning, and you can see where your system is, and you can discuss, it starts from local as a method and as a kind of support system of Formal One. The people who cannot go to the school, they can attend to this system. But the technology and as a culture also, when we start to integrate and the system itself get mature. And today we are talking about metaverse, and we are about to switch metaverse learning area. Now today, if we get the general idea, all countries must be in this sixth stage. But if you ask me where Turkey is, I think it is between 4 and 5. My university, Anadolu University, is the first university start to give distance education to all people in my country and also in Europe and other countries, Turkish people. And we have now actively and inactively 3 million students in distance system, and nearly 1 million of them are active. It means they are taking classes, they are taking courses, they are taking exams, all over stuff. And now we are trying to switch the next step, but it is not easy. You have to change to all country idea, but it is not easy. First of all, you have to get the human sources to use this system. In this system, in these stages, you have to understand distance education, open and distance education is a system, not method. System means you have to design system with your professional teams, several teams. It is not just the problem the teacher who teach in front of the computer or in front of television or radio. So also this is global and local idea. You have to interact, you have to understand the other people's needs. Okay, we can switch. We are now talking about smart open distance learning, and at Anadolu University, with different project, we want to use immersive technologies. This is immersive area. And this is immersive Uber learning area. You know that Uber mean you have the shopping center without any shops, or you have a taxi system without having any taxi. And in the future, there will be no schools. So, but there will be a learning system. Are you ready for that? What can you get it? What is it? Or just regret it? Or just no, it couldn't be happening. Yes, it is happening. Look at the MOOCs. Look at the blockchain developments. This is the new formal, informal, and non-formal. They are getting one singularity. So we are integrating 3D or more dimensions into the learning environments to improve learners' critical thinking skills, because the people can touch, smell, and they can work together. The walls, the time are no problem. So this is the transhumanist area, and it means also by integrating technology into human body, you can upgrade the system, human system. Maybe you remember it. There was a series. It names is $6 Million Man. It was my favorite when I was a child, and now it is the time we are becoming transhumans. If you look at the some experiments like the famous one, Elon Musk, the Link project. Now, today we can talk about how can we upload the conscience in the computers and store them, and how can we upload from computers. And it is happening when you go to the laboratories and do that kind of neuroscience experiments. It is happening. Like pilots, they used to teacher pilots experiences to transfer new pilots, and they were successful. So we have to get ready. It means in the very near future, all our school system and learning system will be changed radically and dramatically. So we have to get ready this one as a culture, as a human being, as a scientist, and as a lifelong learner. Okay, we can switch. So in this case, we have to ask how our institutions, societies, and ourselves will adapt those kind of smart changes. So we need to ask this one, because we would like to get better learning system, just not look at the outcomes. Learning is a kind of process, so we have to aware about the process as well, and this is Uber immersive learning area. So how can we decentralize the idea for lifelong learning? So what kind of technology we have to integrate? What kind of human resources I need to get this digital transformation perfectly? Okay. So we have to understand what is Uber learning. We have to start to discuss, and we have to develop policy about that. And we have to realize how we are using this system and what is the Uber immersive learning potential. And we have to design several multicultural scenarios for utilize that kind of immersive learning. Think about that. You are attending the medicine school or law school or engineering school. You have to have several scenarios in your system. So in this uber immersive learning with several dimensions, your learners can live inside the learning situation, like in real life. At the finally, you have to perfectly identify what are the benefits in your culture. So how can I transfer this ones to other? So what we are doing at Anadolu University, actually, to switching the new technologies, as we are using the same stages right now for switching the next version of open and distance learning. First of all, we have to do background search. It is the most important stage to integrations this smart open and distance learning environment. I am sorry. And it begins, background search begins dreaming and then planning and finally exploring. You have to dream. Like Einstein says, without dreaming, you cannot, without imagining, you cannot be successful. So you have to ask what we need, what do we need, what do you need, what the lifelong learners need, what the society need, and why. And then you have to set up your goals, and then in the future, and you have to understand trends and developments, and then you have to switch. And at the first stage, you have to find human resources, and also if you don't have that kind of human resources, you have to set up new system to train or educate these human resources for the future. In designing, you have to be careful about preparing, determining, building, and orienting. And those 4 stages in design part is the important, because you decide needs and purpose of this kind of learning, uber immersive learning. And then you have to design and understand the framework. And this framework must be flexible. And you have to also define in this framework elements, dimensions, necessities. And you have to do that. You must do kind of SWOT, SWOT, SWOT analysis, Delphi techniques, action research, several ones. It not happen just in the classroom without any scientifically collected data, and then you have to answer what I did. Okay, we can switch. And the third stage is implementation. You have to start to use your, environments, and you have to monitor. You have to observe the environments, what is going on, and you have to write kind of action plans and action kind of reports. Then evaluate the system, summative, formative, and you have to finally get how can you take new actions. And this kind of summative and formative assessments must focus lifelong learners, the system, the process, and also the all dimensions like learning, technology, communication, sociology, psychology, management. You have to get everything is about each dimensions. Okay. Digital transformation is important. It helps us improve our students' learning. So you have to redesign your learning credit system. The students now can take courses from different schools, not just their own schools. Like Anadolu in Turkey, any student at Anadolu University can take the same course from another university. We get, but also now there is a MOOCs. There are MOOCs and other informal and non-formal learning environments. Okay, how can I use these ones as a, in my learning credit system. How can I integrate that? And also, the other important part, you have to develop risk intelligence. Risk, look at, we cannot guess COVID-19 area, none of us. So we just found ourselves in that kind of problematic area. So each institution and each person in these institutions must develop risk intelligence. To develop risk intelligence, first of all, you get risk literacy, and you have to aware about that, and you have to get risk culture. Without that, we cannot cope with about anything in this digital transformation. And digital leadership is another important steps. And who will the leader? If you would like to become a leader in the learning environment, not in just your country, but also all over the world, how can it be? How can you help the others improve their system? Cybersecurity is becoming more important also, and there are several experiments, and today blockchain is providing us better system securely, and quantum technologies. We have to understand quantum technologies, quantum computers, and we start to integrate our system, and we have to design our learning environment based on quantum technologies. And augmented literacy is becoming like regular literacy. Each of us, from parents to the regular stuff, we have to understand augmentation, because the foundation of the digital transformation is augmentation. So, and also we have to understand artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence, not technology. Today we are talking about racism in artificial intelligence. So how can we how can we react that? Otherwise, we transfer everything in our real life, our biases, our prejudice, to new technological environments. I am sorry, but at the same time, we have limited sources as a country, as a person, as a globe. So, how can we use these limited sources equally for everyone, all lifelong learners? Lifelong learners, think about that, refugees, think about the people in hospitals, think about that, the people in prisons, think about the people living in the far away from cities, and they have no chance to reach equal, even in our law system, but they cannot find the equal access to information and resources. We have to design that, and what we need, ethics and law. We have to design learning ethics and law system from the scratch in this system. Yes. Okay, here's my last two words. This is the one, I love this expression, especially if you go to the east part of the world. It is getting worse, but sometimes in the best part. Most of us grew in the 20th centuries. We are the adults from 20th centuries, but the kids now, right now, from the 21st century. But we are using 19th century curriculum and techniques, and by using 18th century calendar. Maybe it is why Finland is very successful about their system. They overcome all that kind of struggles before, and because they use their risk intelligence, we have to model and learn from them maybe. But what is going on our regular traditional classrooms, even distance or face-to-face, we are trying to design very traditional classrooms. Okay. And in this transhumanist area, if you would like to design smart education environments, smart open and distance learning environments for lifelong learners, and we would like to improve our learners' life skills, not just learning. Life skills means how they can cope with everything in their life. The learning is not happening in the classroom. Learning is happening everywhere, every time, anytime. So we have to understand. Uh, you can design perfect curriculum. You can design perfect classrooms. You have a great technology and perfect school. But as a person, as a system, as a politicians, as a the uh, uh, adults, if we cannot understand or internalize it and understand or believe that, it doesn't mean anything. We will not successful. We have to first of all develop ourselves, develop our personal quality in learning and technology. Okay. And thank you. If you have any questions, I am happy to answer here.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gülsün KURUBACAK, for this excellent presentation. I will come back to you at the end of the session to answer questions. Our fourth presenter will be Dr. Frederic FOVET, professor at Royal Roads University in Canada. He is the program head for the Master of Arts in Educational Leadership and Management. Welcome and many thanks for accepting our invitation. Your presentation's title is "What is the important data that is not being recorded in comparative international analysis on student success?"
Thank you, Dr. Naji, and thank you for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here. So yes, today I'm going to be talking about the sort of indicators that maybe we're not collecting in international data mining at the moment around education. So there's going to be a nice connection with the first presentation, which talked about design and instructional design and inclusive design, because that's one of the things I'm definitely going to bring up today that is not being recorded in the data that we collect. And then with the presentation from Finland too, which showed some of the limitations around what the data provides us currently on learning outcomes in schools and how we rate schools and assess their success. Are you able to bring my slides up? I think we can start with. So my field is inclusion. I work a lot in inclusion, universal design for learning, and that's the lens I've taken really on examining the topic of this conference, both at domestic level and international level, the sort of comparative data that we are currently using to produce quality analysis on school performance. Are you able to bring my slides up?
Can you share your presentation, please?
Oh, is it for me to share? Okay, hang on a minute. Okay, I thought you were sharing from your end. Okay, hang on. I'm going to have to just quickly download it. Won't be long, just bear with me. We're a bit ahead of time, so I apologize for the delay, but we should still be well within the time. Okay. Okay, can you see my presentation now? Is it up? Can you tell me?
No, we cannot see.
Okay, because it's telling me that it's sharing at the moment. Still not seeing anything? There might be a slight delay in the... No luck so far?
Sorry, I was disconnected.
It's saying that I'm sharing, but you're saying that you don't see the slides.
Okay. Now the slides are.
Oh, now you can see them. Is that good? Okay, are you controlling them or am I controlling them in a stage?
I will control them.
You will control it. Okay, so we make a start. So what is the important data that's not being recorded in comparative international analysis? And we'll look particularly at learner diversity proactively and looking at ways that we can maybe quantify this. So the hope is not just to criticize current processes with regards to data collection and analysis, but to also offer some views as to how we might improve the system and how we might come up with indicators that actually enable us to reflect the work that is being done to address learner diversity within the K-12 system. So we can go to the next slide. So those are the objectives today. I'm going to acknowledge, first of all, I think it's important to acknowledge the global push against national and international data analysis. This conference obviously looks at the benefits and the gains that have been achieved through the creation of PISA, etc. But there's also a lot of pushback in the field, and I think we need to be able to actually look at that with lucidity before we can move on and see what needs to change for the next decade. So I'm going to look at some of the motivations behind that pushback, particularly from educators, classroom practitioners, and then examine the extent to which inclusive practices currently fail to be recorded in comparative international data. And I will look at both what exists, what has been attempted, and what needs to happen. And that would lead me to the end of the presentation, where I will explore avenues for reform and for the development of pertinent large-scale qualitative tools, particularly because that's really what's missing at the moment. And I will examine the fact that there's probably an epistemologic crisis in the fact that we are sticking and adhering to quantitative measures rather than quality measures that at times we need. So I think it's first important to realize that we've done phenomenal progress. There's been giant steps made with the data collection, data analysis around education. And that has led us to being able to do international comparative studies to see what works, what doesn't work, and assess why certain countries do well, certain countries don't well, and beyond that, obviously, which areas of education are more performant than others. And PISA has been crucial in allowing some of these analysis and conclusion. So I think we can go to the next slide. But it's also been an occasion for unprecedented resistance. So there's widespread resistance and misunderstanding and even fear among teachers and administrators against all forms of standardized testings at the moment. So we have a continued disquiet, I would call it. So Pons, for example, talks about the ongoing PISA shock. Sort of describes in the study the fact that really after 20 years, we're still in a state of shock, and schools don't always know what to do with that data. So even when it's there, it creates more of a sense of panic than anything constructive that they can actually move forward with. There are other studies, such as the one cited in 2020, that discuss the dangerous precedence of PISA stats taking precedence over educational research. Instead of seeing some of that international data, in particular comparative data, as yet another tool for progress and for reform, we are often pushing aside a lot of structured and often qualitative research to just focus on these quantitative results. And as we know, again, I'm going to come back to epistemology quite a lot, there's not so much that quantitative data can give us. Often it tells us what's happening, the trend, but we don't always understand the why it's happening. And so there's a vacuum there happening. And we often, at the moment, are dismissing the sort of research that can actually tell us the why that phenomenon is being observed and why it's there. Tvev and Lundahl also discussed the misuse of international comparative data to push political reform. So that at the level of each jurisdiction, each state, this has been a problem that has sometimes come up, where that data is being used by people who don't always necessarily understand that data or able to carry out an analysis that is leading to informed choices, rather it's being used as a political tool. In the field itself, there's explicit pushback, tension with regards to the purpose of assessment. So our colleague from Finland talked about some of the tension that exists around assessment. That's very tangible. I'm going to use a lot of phenomenological input here. I teach in a master's level, so I normally teach master level classes of professionals, teachers who are coming back mid-career, looking to become principals. And so in those large classes of Canadian educators at midpoint in their career, that tension is very, very tangible. People who've been dealing with PISA results for sometimes and other comparative international data for sometimes a decade, 2 decades, that still don't know quite what to do with it and therefore become fearful and push back. There's tension with regards to goals and values of teacher training. Of course, international data comparison shows us what learning outcomes are met, but sometimes it doesn't really indicate to what extent what teaching philosophies are applied to get to those outcomes, what teaching philosophies are prioritized, what values are actually instilled into the instruction itself. And that's what our colleague from Finland was talking about. And there's obviously a clash with learning outcomes and teaching philosophies. So, for example, and it's very present in Finland, which is very constructivist in its approach, from what I gather. You reach an outcome, but what else have you achieved in terms of personal discovery, self-awareness, well-being, affiliation within the school environment, and so forth. And there's also, let's not forget, considerable evidence of en masse pushback from parents. So if we look at really public perceptions of what that data is useful for, certainly I would say a great majority of parents don't understand the purpose and actually still interpret it as personal assessment. So how their child is doing with vis-a-vis those standards and vis-a-vis their benchmark, which has never really been the intent of that data collection at all. Thanks. We'll go to the next one. So it's important to look at the causes of this pushback. And I think it's fair to say that, to tackle the elephant in the room, that a lot of that pushback comes from a fear of a neoliberal agenda that underlies the discourse on quality indicators in education. So the fact that, we are treating, and since historically since Thatcher and Reagan, really, we are treating education as any other business, and therefore we must create indicators that show us quality in that service for a service user, which is the parent. So that's really the equation that we've created, and that's a very neoliberal, sort of construct, and that is creating a lot of fear in people. Originally, really, all of that data collection and data analysis was meant, because it was international and comparative, to be really a snapshot done at repeated intervals that enable people to make comparison obviously within jurisdictions, sometimes for us in Canada and US, even between provinces and states, but also to be able to get a cue as to what are the different trends and what's working somewhere and not, and to learn from each other's perspective. But that actually has really been eroded, and what we see now is really a push, a dribble down pressure, that instead of that being a very high level accountability, it becomes really a pressure for excellence that is pushed down by school districts to school leaders to teachers, unfortunately, to students. And what we see, and our colleague from Finland talked about it, is really often now even distress, anxiety from the students who are actually feeling that really this standardized testing and this international data collection is there to actually assess their own performance. So really, if you look at what's happened in the last 20 years in schools, we've really completely gone on a tangent and taken this off the tracks and now using it for complete different purposes. That's pressure which we feel being dribbled down is what causes most of that pressure. So if you go back to the next slide, there's a cartoon that I often use and I feel is fairly useful, which really sums up fairly well what we see. There we go. You see it well there, the district level pressure for just general accountability, but now being seen as a pressure for performance, and then pressure for performance imposed on the child, on the teacher, who then obviously dribbles this down to the students. That is why we see so much resistance against that data collection, and that can be addressed. That part of the pressure can be addressed. I think it's our collective duty at the moment to deconstruct what's happening and to make people understand that that is not the purpose of this international data collection analysis, and to break down this cycle. In a way, education is still very new to processes of accountability and quality assurance, and unfortunately, we are seeing mishaps happen in what we see. And I think that can be rectified. So in a way, this resistance is not the most worrying, because this we can address eventually, particularly by making people understand that that's not the purpose of that data. We're not using it for individual performance analysis, and that should be broken down. So we will get to the end of that pressure. I think it's a work on the table for us in the next decade, but I think that will be resolved and we will understand. Particularly, I think it's important to make people realize that however unfortunate this phenomena, we don't want to go back to a world of sort of 20 years or 30 years back, where really in a lot of countries, including the global north, we had no indicators for quality. So even a country like the US or Canada, we actually had no idea what was being done, how it was done, what was effective. We were really in the dark ages of information, actually no data whatsoever. So that's not either something that we want to go back to. And I think that puts us really in that right space for the next decade, where we don't want to go back to that sort of absence of data, but we don't want to get to this process where it's being used for the wrong purposes either. So we can go on to the next slide. And there are some specific questions that we need to look at when we look at how this data is going to develop in the next 10 years. There's some disquiet that is not going to go away and that we're not going to be able to solve unless we actually make changes to the way we collect data internationally and we use them. These studies particularly don't actually look at learner diversity on an educational system's ability to develop, grow, and sustain inclusive practices. So inclusion in its widest term is not actually at the moment gauged. It's not assessed by this data collection, this data analysis. So as a result, there's a fairly large gap between this quantitative data that we have emerging from this international comparative studies and what we know is good practice in terms of addressing, first of all, recognizing learner diversity, developing inclusive practices, and being able to meet all the needs of all learners within our classrooms. And so you've got some authors there who have talked about this gap, this chasm that is being created. And really what we see and what's not going to go away is this disquiet that teachers feel between, one priority which they're given, which is that, it's 21st century, you need to actually reach all students in your classroom on the one hand, and these quality indicators that they're given that do not reflect the efforts that they may be applying to actually meet that first imperative. So that's the situation we're in now, and that's really the heart of my presentation. So we can go on to the next slide. I'm going to look at what limitations are, and then I'm going to look at what we do have in terms of tools. So I talked about the gap, but if we look at this more, analyze this with more finesse, with more nuance, there are actually 3 angles where that data is lacking drastically in terms of learner diversity. So first, I'm going to look at the level of the student, and I'm going to look at the level of the ecology that we have in each school, and then looking at from a systemic and a strategic perspective. So in terms of the students themselves, because that data was originally meant to be purely comparative, there were actually no steps and no proactive measures taken to actually enable students to have access to some degree of differentiation in the way they completed those assessments. So in many, and I'm going to be wider in PISA and look here even at national domestic standardized testing between states and between provinces, and other forms of data collection that we're doing internationally and nationally at the moment, we don't have provisions for students to actually have access to the normal tools and strategies that they would have in their classrooms to address their own specific needs. So a best example of this, for example, is that students are generally in all of these tests not allowed the regular accommodations which they actually allowed in class assessment. Now, often students, teachers that are having inclusion query that and say, how can we have systems that actually are doing quality assurance but don't even allow the basic accommodations that are available to students in their regular classroom? And you can see the logic behind it, because when you were originally designing 20 years ago international tools for comparative studies, the assumption was that there are students with disabilities in every classroom, in every school, in every jurisdiction. So really, it doesn't come into it in the sense that if you have 10% of students with disability in Finland, you also have it in Italy and probably in Turkey, etc. So that when you're really comparing that data, it's not going to affect the comparison that you're doing. Well, to an extent, that was the case. But now we see that that data is being used for multiple means. And what we end up having is students who actually are now constantly put through these data analysis exercises and do not have access to the strategies that they need. And now it's, I think, 20 years on, it's time that we actually looked at that. Because it's creating a lot of issues of perceptions of teachers, perceptions of parents, and the students themselves, I think, a malaise from how they feel as they're being put through that exercise. It's very difficult for a child to understand that they're taking a test today, they're not taking it with accommodation because it's for national purposes. But tomorrow they're going to be taking a test in class, and then they will have access to tools that allow them to perform to their optimal capacity. So that is problematic and needs to be addressed. The second one is obviously in terms of looking at, particularly from a social model perspective, looking at the ecology of the environment. We are very much at the moment assessing learner outcomes. So how the learner who's been put through a learning experience is able to achieve outcomes and demonstrate competencies. But we are refusing to admit that this is not just the student's ability, it's a system's ability to support their students in meeting those achievements. So it's almost like we are only really assessing half of the equation and not looking at the other equation at all, particularly when it comes to inclusion. How well has those systems performed in supporting those students so that they could meet those competencies? We're not seeing that. We're seeing basically the students able to achieve or not these competencies, but we still have a dark, basically, void here in terms of, well, how, and particularly in terms of nuance and refinement, how have these ecological systems, these schools or these school districts, been able to actually specifically address these needs so that we see this outcome actually being recorded? That's absent altogether at the moment, and that's problematic. Because from a social model perspective, if you are going to achieve inclusion, you are achieving it because we are designing inclusively. That's not the responsibility of the child. That's responsibility of the system to design inclusively so that the outcome is met. And we're not assessing that. Now, if we can now zoom out and look at a systemic dimension, there are also issues there, because beyond classroom practices, so beyond what a teacher does in their own classroom to include a learner who's diverse, there are factors that are actually at school level or school district level, or sometimes even at provincial or state level, where we develop environments, we develop cultures that either welcome people or do not welcome them. And that is actually not being recorded at all. So, for example, and I will come back to that in my last slide, but there's a lot of literature now on what we call the hidden curriculum, that whatever you are presenting to your parents and learners in your community, whatever you are stating on your mission statement, what you do in practice in your school, what values you are sort of prioritizing in a non-explicit way, in a non-formulated way, is often what is most impactful in whether a student feels that they are affiliated to the school and they can succeed and they're being supported. We have no indicators at all at the moment on school culture. I have to talk quickly about the COVID crisis and its impact. Obviously, that has, and obviously the literature is starting to emerge now, but that has definitely increased that tension that we've talked about. It's been cathartic in some ways in showing us all the limitations of current national and international data practice in education, because we've carried on with these processes and then they haven't worked, obviously, because these students are disconnected, working from home, etc. And it's broken down. But really, I would say that what's shown us, it was broken down before, right? Some of these instruments were not working before. Now they're definitely not working. The inequities also have increased. The gap has widened. We know from the literature that social inequities have widened massively during the COVID crisis. Students who are socially, economically challenged have suffered much more. Students who are racialized have suffered much more. Students with learning disabilities and disabilities have suffered much more, have not been supported. And that is not, again, going to be reflected in the quality assurance tools that we have. We're going to see students fail, but we're not going to understand why they failed or what is responsible in terms of what has not been done during the COVID crisis. So that will be an important challenge, I think, moving forward in the next few years. When that data emerges, the ability to be able to put a why behind the figures that we see is something that we're not able now with the indicators that we have at present. We'll go on to the next slide. So looking quickly at what do we have, before I tell you that there's nothing there, I did want to do a sort of scan of our tools and what we have available. We know that the large scale instruments such as PISA, etc., don't actually address all this. Now, there's obviously been efforts to fill the gap. I've given you an example there of strength through diversity, education for inclusive practice. That's an OECD document, which is promising. But if you look at it, it's actually very much focused only on refugees and migrants. And that's a problem that we're going to have in the conceptualize of what learning diversity is. There's a cultural element here, and not every country in the world actually is looking at inclusion and diversity in the same way. For some, it's still very much about disability. For others, such in this document, it's very much about cultural diversity and immigrants and refugees. But we are not looking yet at the impact of race, the impact of sexism, the impact of ableism, the impact of cultural, ethnic sort of representation, etc. So that's something I'll come back to on the next slide. Now, there are some large-scale efforts being developed by private foundations. We're seeing a lot of that at the moment, and I think they need to be acknowledged. I've given you just examples here, but Century Foundations produced a document called How Racially Diverse Schools and Classrooms Can Benefit All Students. This is actually not just a study. This is actually really a national report focusing on the US. Those are definitely worthy of exploration. But again, when we look at the work done by the private sector, by private foundation, it is problematic in terms of scope, lens, international flavor, and the comparative flavor. Usually those documents end up being locked in that foundation's specific objective. So it really goes against the original aim, which was to be able to have neutral, standardized instruments that we can compare across jurisdictions. That doesn't allow us to do that. There's also been key national reports on inclusive practices in specific sectors. Here I've given you, for example, again in the US, the Interagency Working Group on Inclusion in STEM. This is a national document which has been produced for the whole of the US. But again, if you look at those, you will see that they're really mostly proactive recommendations, right? It's not actually data analysis and data collection. It's actually a set of national recommendations on the strength of research of what should be out there, what should be done. But it's not actually a tool for quantitative sort of assessment and evaluation of what's being done if it's successful. So all in all, there's credible efforts out there at the moment, but we're still very far from a functional, sustainable, quantitative, international, and comparative outlook or set of tools that would have the ability to offer a pertinent and valid snapshot of inclusive practices in K-12 sector and their impact on outcomes. So still quite a void there. We'll go on to the next slide, please. Now, obviously, we've looked at qualitative. Now we're going to look at qualitative tools. And there's particularly one famous one, which is the Index for Inclusion. So this was created by Booth and Ansco, and it's really worth mentioning because it's for 2 decades now, it's been sitting there and has had promises for a potential to do just that. And it does look at things from an ecological perspective. So it sort of bursts the bubble and really sort of in a heads-on way accepts the fact that if we're going to do international comparison, we should not just do comparisons of outcomes. We have to make comparisons of practices. And particularly for us in terms of learner diversity and inclusion, the index for inclusion gives a whole set of indicators that can actually be looked at. So it can be used for schools. I'm going to read the quote there because it's quite interesting. It's a set of materials to support schools in the process of inclusive school development, drawing on the views of staff, governors, school students, parents, carers, and other community members. It's concerned with improving educational attainments through inclusive practice, and thus provides an attempt to redress a balance in those schools which have concentrated on raising student attainment at the expense of the development of supportive school community. So it really targets specifically things like PISA and says, we have these indicators for outcomes, but we are going to actually quantify what's missing. What is, everything we've discussed so far, what are the set of practices, what are the real support, and particularly what are people's perceptions of these tools and their effectiveness in supporting students to reach learning outcomes. It has 3 specific objectives. So school can use the index to assess their practices. It's also a tool for planning for improvement. So it doesn't just tell you you're failing at this, you're failing at this, but how can you get to getting better at that? And particularly, it's very participatory, so it ensures the participation of all stakeholders. As you see, it's not just an external assessor saying this is working or not working. And you really get the perspective of school leaders, parents, teachers, students themselves in that index. So it's very promising, but again, here I'd have to say that the lack of impact of the index for inclusion in the last 2 decades has really been an evidence that it's probably not the best of tools yet. It's a step forward, but it's not as malleable as one might think. It's still fairly onerous, it's complex, it's very ecological. So when you give people, it's burst of bubble, it's given people lots of indicators, but I think that once you work in the field of quality assurance, if you have too many indicators, you get to the point where, what do I do with this? Because I just have too many indicators, right? It's very, very ecological. It's gone to the other end. It's given us all of the indicators that could possibly have an impact on the inclusion of learners. But we need to be also realistic. If we are going to do international comparison, we need to have tools that we can actually apply regularly, frequently, and that enables us to make comparisons between, again, jurisdictions and schools, what works and what doesn't work, and to be able to draw conclusions. It's more focused at the moment, as I said in the last slides, on the transformation of in individual sites. So it's very useful for schools who want to go through a self-reflection of what they do, and it provides them with data instruments to do that, but not necessarily the outwards part. Now, obviously, we need to work on that. And now I'm moving to the last part of the presentation. What do we need to do? What needs to happen for the future? How do we need to change and have a call for action to reform these tools so that we can actually fill the gap and we can actually have indicators that tell us what's going on in terms of inclusion? So there's definitely challenges that lie ahead. Because as we've seen, it's not easy. I would say, I'm going to make an assertion here and say that really the biggest problem we have at the moment is an epistemological hurdle. We've seen, we've done okay at the moment with quantitative stats and what those stats can tell us about school systems and what works and what doesn't work. But, if you take a step back and look at epistemology from a research perspective, not just from a surveying perspective, we know that quantitative data can tell us what's going on, but doesn't always tell us why it's going on. So there's a gap to fill there. But in the field of education, we still have a sort of distrust for qualitative tools. And I think that's the malaise that we're facing at the moment. We know that instruments like PISA don't give us the full picture. We know we need a qualitative, large-scale qualitative instruments that are able to fill the gap. But we still have a lot of distrust in education as to our reliance on qualitative instruments, and yet it's what we need. So I think the debate that we have at the moment is much bigger than just the tools that we have and why they don't work. It's really looking back, stepping back and saying, what's our position as a social science branch of social sciences with regards to qualitative instruments, and how can we create qualitative instruments that can be applied widely and frequently and give us the indicators that we need. There are definitely tools out there, and I think I'd encourage everyone to look at some of the work that's being done on large-scale comparative studies using qualitative instrument. Certainly, I have a colleague in Canada, for example, which runs something called the Young Lives Lab and works on adolescent well-being in schools and carries on studies that are being done qualitatively, but being done on large scales, both in I said both, but it's not both. It's Australia, in Canada, in the UK, and I think in Latin America. So those projects exist, and now I think it's come to the time where states need to look to these qualitative researchers that have already undertaken this kind of work and have developed tools that are efficient and sustainable to integrate this in the picture and the snapshots that we get for the purpose of comparison. At the moment, I would say there's no political will for this to happen. And again, here we come back to the way things like the PISA results are being used and the danger that we've seen of them being used for political, certain political objectives. At the moment, I think there's no political intentions in most jurisdictions to go deeper and understand the why of what we're saying. So we need to tackle that too. We need to really change the perception that we have about that data and how we use it and what it's going to lead to. And I think this leads back to our colleague's presentation from Finland. Now, looking ahead, and it's going to be, I think, towards the end here, some of the key indicators that remain largely ignored at the moment, and this is why we need these qualitative indicators. Ableism. At the moment, we still very much in the field of inclusion have a lot of people who still are looking at inclusion from a biomedical perspective, right? Still someone there from a deficit perspective, that student doesn't have this, doesn't have that, is not able to achieve that. And we know from the literature that really inclusion can only be reached if we adopt a social model of disability, where really we're saying the role is ours. We need to change the way we design instructions so that these students fit in. It's not up to fixing the students, it's up to fixing the student. We don't have anything in data collection at the moment with analyses that show us to what extent schools are sort of leaning towards biomedical or to social model practices. Racism, and the Black Lives Matter, I think, has awakened the whole world about the impact that racism has on all aspects of society and public governance, and education is not an exception. It's moving fast. I think certainly in North America, we're seeing people wake up and realize that this is something we need to quantify. This has a huge impact on learning outcomes, but we don't have anything at the moment that actually is able to quantify that impact. Cultural centricism as well. We are increasingly aware that people are at the moment often moving in mass migration because of political unrest, etc. And we know that arriving in a new country isn't just about content and competencies, but it's actually about adapting to a new culture. We have very few indicators to actually show to what extent students are able to and supported in carrying out that sort of adaptation to new cultural, new norms, a new setting that they're not used. Sexism, again, I'm going to be quick there, but the Me Too movement, just as equally as the Black Lives Matter, has again created a wave of a shockwave around most of society, and schools and the K-12 sector has not been, again, an exception to this, but we need indicators to this, again. And there is certainly a lot of research that still shows us the way sexism impacts, for example, STEM education and girls' progress through science education and math. We know this, the research tells us this, but we don't have at the moment in our quantitative analysis any indicators that are able to quantify this and to tackle it proactively. Socioeconomic challenges, I'm going to go quickly because I think we're running out of time, but socioeconomic challenges as well. Poverty still is something that is sadly completely missing from the picture that we're getting at the moment on learning outcomes. And we all know the impact that this has. Even if I take, even in Canada, even in the global north, I take a province like Nova Scotia, we know that 1/3 of children are going to school without appropriate food. And we don't have ways of actually seeing the impact that this has on the inclusion and the learning outcomes of these kids that actually are in these circumstances. Then more widely, decolonizing the curriculum is a pressing priority at the moment, both in the global north in terms of ongoing colonialization. So for us, for example, it's a truth and reconciliation in Canada, seeing how we need to decolonize our practices so that Indigenous students can feel they are working from an organic environment that is theirs. Again, we have guidelines, we have calls for action, but we don't have indicators to show us that this is happening and how it's happening. And beyond that, process of post-colonialism, the deconstruction of post-colonialist practices in the global south as well, how we move away from language of instruction in French or English, etc. That is not being quantified by PISA at the moment. That needs to be looked at. And I'm going to finish on this, but more important, the importance of EDI, so equity, diversity, and inclusion, terms that now are reverberating around both the K-12 and the post-secondary sector, present in every governance meeting at the moment. Everyone knows there's a pressure to make this happen, be a reality. But we have a word of warning: if we move forward with agendas, but we don't have indicators, qualitative indicators that are sustainable to show us that this has been met, it's sort of shooting in the wind because we don't know whether that's actually ever going to make a transformation. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Mr. Frederic FOVET, for your excellent presentation. And as we are over the time allotted for this session, so I will just ask our guests a few questions. The first question to Dr. KURUBACAK. Hello, Doctor. How to combine summative assessment and formative assessment in order to improve distance learning?
You have the special team first of all. The people know about formative and summative assessment and open and distance learning. Like Anadolu University, we have a different center. There are several professionals working on it, and we have kind of project portfolios, not just the tests, the other kind of evaluation tools. And also we have kind of e-portfolio system, especially the teacher education. We can assess their improvements with the teacher in real life together. And it depends on you. It depends on your school, your university. How much money do you have? How much staff? How many staff do you have? And what is your strategic planning? And you have to use your critical thinking skills and design your strategic plan. But if you ask me, first of all, it is not just based on the system, use just teacher. You have your system like we have, let's say if it is a midterm exams, there are 700,000 people are helping us. It is a big system. You have to design that kind of management system. And also we have a learning management, the other management systems online working together perfectly. It depends on how you start and how you design. And also not just quantitative, as Frederic says, we are using qualitative measurements also. It depends on you. You have to use your imagination to design that kind of system, any kind. But if you are just using multiple choice exam, it is not enough to evaluate your students. Okay, you have to switch different learning tools, different learning systems, and you have to get professionals in your system to do that. Okay.
Thank you. Another question from Rita. How do you suggest to keep a human interaction with intelligence artificial tools, especially as the learners become digital codes and have less human feedback of their work?
This is another good question, perfect question. It is again you. It is about your system. How you look at artificial intelligence. How can you use that kind of tools in your system? And to me, if the artificial intelligence system well designed, it is no matter to answer or give feedback, But if you would like to design more human-based system with artificial intelligence, you have to find your way. You know, you have to ask your students. You have to ask your stakeholders. It's all depends on you. You have to design human-centered system. Okay, but if the artificial intelligence tools given better feedback to learners in a short time, you use it. You know, this is the new age, 21st age. Don't forget it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor. I have a question to Dr. Frederic. Why there isn't political will to invest in the design and implementation of large-scale qualitative tools?
Well, that's an interesting question, and I mean, the answer, to be honest, may vary depending on geo sort of political landscape. It may be different in different jurisdictions, but I think again, there we would have to look at the impact of neoliberal sort of positions on educations. And in the last 20 years, we really are now treating education as a business, and therefore treating it simply as, you know, either it's achieved or not achieved. I think we need to refine that discourse. I don't think we ever are going to be able to pull education out of that neoliberal lens. It's a battle that some of my colleagues are leading. I don't think it's worth it, because I think it's here to stay. We are always going to be in that perspective. We are going to continue to treat education as a business to some degree. But I think we need to do some pushback and be able to say, okay, fine, yes, we need accountability. We need to see whether, you know, this is efficient or not efficient. But we need more than just, you know, sort of a simple black and white, this has worked or this has not worked, whether for a school district, an area, a whole province. We need to be able to understand the detail. I don't think at the moment there's a political will to understand the detail. There's just, in a way, a sort of punitive way. And we see this, for example, in the UK with the Ofsted score, etc., of saying you are either performing well or you're not performing well. And then, you know, for action to follow immediately. But really, we are now 20 years on, having worked with that data, needing to say, it's not working well, but what isn't working well? And how can this school actually, or this school district or this region actually improve on the way it addresses, particularly in my lens, learner diversity? That is, and there's a sort of political expediency. Often we just want the result, but we're not really necessarily patient enough to see how we can support a school or support a district in reaching these outcomes. Now, don't forget that for a political lens, often the truth that you're going to unearth with that qualitative data is not necessarily truth that you want to, you know, to air politically. So if you realize it in a certain area, certain school district, you know, you do have the impact of culture, or the impact of racism, or the impact of sexism, the impact of ableism on the performance of these students. You're going to have to do something about it. So it's a bit of Pandora's box. If you have the indicators, you're not going to be able to ignore it, and you're going to have to spend money actually tackling these issues. And I think that's a bit of a fear politically, that if you have that data, you can't ignore it. Do you really want that data? But that's a question for politicians. I think for us as educators, it's a firm, we need that data, because we will not be able to have an accurate picture of what's happening with that data.
Thank you. Another question, maybe the last. We are so far from an inclusive school, and we are also very far from an inclusive world. So, how do we make large-scale assessments inclusive in such context?
Well, I think and that's really the purpose of this talk, is, you know, we have become kind of stuck in the last 20 years saying these tools give us some picture, but they don't give us the full picture. And we have some indicators as to whether students are achieving competencies and outcomes, but we don't understand to what extent as schools we're supporting them in actually in an inclusive way in achieving those outcomes. And I think we become kind of resigned. If you look at the literature, there's a lot of people say, oh, well, that's what we have and that's what we work with. I think, just as much as I've talked about Black Lives Matter and the Me Too movement, there has been, I think, in 2020 and 2021, a desire to break the status quo and say, this isn't enough. We need to understand the deep social canvas issues that are leading to some of what we see happening. And therefore, I think it's, we must be careful not to resign ourselves, say, oh, we're not there yet. I think we can get there, but we need to push ourselves. And particularly for us that work in research and education, we need to create those indicators. They're not going to just happen. We need researchers to lobby governments to say, these are the tools that we need. It's not about taking PISA away, but it's about complementing it with other indicators. And just as there was a push 20 years ago, we now need to have a push to say we need social justice indicators. We need them. And yes, they need to be standardized. And yes, they need to be sustainable, but they need to be equalitative. And we need to understand the why.
Thank you so much, Dr. Frederic Fauvet, for your participation in our conference. And thank you, Dr. Gülsün KURUBACAK, for your participation. And see you another time. Goodbye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.